Good morning and thanks for joining us. Today we'll hear from Sparc Technologies Managing Director Nick O'Loughlin, who will provide an update on Sparc Hydrogen, including the latest on the pilot plant and what's next for the technology. This session is in listen mode only, but please feel free to type in any questions into the chat and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. Nick, over to you.
Thanks, Simon, and thanks everyone for joining me today on a very cold, wet day here in Adelaide. Just allow me to put up the presentation, which I'll share. This is the same presentation that was released to the ASX this morning. So you can go through the slides at your own leisure. There's a couple of animations which you will be able to see as we go through it today. Just let me hide the controls there. Hopefully you can see the screen and that's all coming up on your screens okay. All right, I'll try and keep the presentation to about 15 minutes and then take questions at the end. And this is a slide that we include in all of our investor decks, just covering off on Sparc Technologies. We are a business of two key technology areas. And the focus of the presentation today is on Sparc Hydrogen, which is next generation green hydrogen production using photocatalytic water splitting. On the other side of our business, we work in graphene-based additives and our flagship additive is called Sparc. On this side, we are approaching commercialization and we are looking to commercialize that additive product in commonly used protective coatings on steel assets during the year FY26. So we've got a number of collaborators, both from the coatings industry and asset owners trialling the Sparc enhanced product. And as I said, we do have strong progress and confidence that we will reach commercialization in the not too distant future there. From a corporate perspective, we completed a capital raise early on in May. And this slide has been updated for the placement component of that capital raise. So we are now well funded, having raised $2.2 million at 15 cents. And that funding will secure the work streams that the company has for the next 12 to 18 months. From a board perspective, Simon Kidston stepped up as chairman in Q1. And he's a very experienced executive, formerly from the banking industry, also founded Genex Power, which was sold to J Power and had a portfolio of renewable energy assets. So he has a lot of connections in the spaces that we are working with. And Daniel Eddington also sits on the board as a founder of the company. We don't have any major shareholders outside of the University of Adelaide, which holds about 6%, which was earned through vending in of IP into Sparc Technologies. To touch on the share purchase plan that we have open at the moment, it closes on Thursday of this week. Been really pleased with the support that we've seen throughout the open window, and we encourage interested shareholders to look at the documentation, which is available both on the ASX and through post or email, if you would like to participate there. Just to make a point that the capital raise that we have done and are in the process of doing with regard to the share purchase plan is providing funding for Sparc Technologies. None of that funding will need to be applied to Sparc Hydrogen within the next 12 months. Sparc Hydrogen is fully funded post the stage 2 commitment that was made by the partnership earlier this year. And the funding from Sparc Technologies went in Q1 of this year. So to get into the meat of the presentation, this really bulks out some of the slides that we used in a shorter form for our investor decks and seeks to provide a bit more information on the technology, the developments around the pilot plant and what we're looking to achieve with our investment in Sparc Hydrogen. So as an introduction, Sparc Hydrogen is focused on next generation green hydrogen production using a process called photocatalytic water splitting. Photocatalytic water splitting or photocatalysis has been known about in the scientific field for about 50 years. And Sparc Hydrogen is looking to be the first company really to commercialize that process to produce green hydrogen as an alternative to the current method for production, which is really around a process called electrolysis, which uses the vast amounts of electricity and power to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. So our differentiation within photocatalysis and photocatalytic water splitting is really our patented solar reactor, which looks to incorporate elements from the concentrated solar industry with photocatalysis. And this is a concept that the founder of the technology has been working on for over a decade now. And we believe it holds great potential in accelerating the commercialization of this process through lower infrastructure requirements, energy use, and a flexibility and scalability advantage over electrolysis. So the partnership as of the start of this year, when the stage 2 commitment was made, is as such. Sparc Technologies and Fortescue are equal shareholders within the joint venture, holding 36% each. The University of Adelaide has 28% of the joint venture and is free carried through to the middle of next year, up until the completion of the current research program. So the joint venture is a private company with the 3 shareholders that you see on screen. We have a single employee who is a project manager, who I'll cover on the subsequent slide. And then there's contributions made from the partners to really drive what happens within the project and the company. So Sparc Technologies provides a lot of the management and coordination of the JV, technology commercialization lead, and Fortescue, obviously being a leader in green hydrogen globally, provides a lot of expertise both in R&D and use of hydrogen, also project development, which is a real strong point for their business. And the University of Adelaide is where all of the researchers are housed. The labs are based at the university's North Terrace campus. We're developing the pilot plant at the university's Roseworthy campus, which is north of Adelaide. And they are the developer and contributor of the IP, which will be vended into Sparc Hydrogen or assigned Sparc Hydrogen in the middle of 2026. The JV, as I mentioned, is fully funded. Now we've got well over $1 million in the bank, and we're spending that on the build of the pilot plant along with the research program. And we do have several grants on foot at the moment. If we are successful with any of those grants, that will extend the funding window, I would expect, beyond the middle of 2026, which has been set out as per the stage 2 commitment. So a little bit more detail on the research team and Vinod also as project managers. So this technology, which really goes to the combination of concentrated solar with photocatalysis and the development of reactors to perform that process, had been founded and led by Professor Greg Meether, who is a former head of chemistry at the University of Adelaide, remains a key professor at the University of Adelaide within that department. And he has over 40 years experience studying the interaction of sunlight and molecules, and over 10 years experience within photocatalysis and particular development of this technology. He is well known in the field globally and is an Australian director of a partnership between the US National Science Foundation and CSIRO for green hydrogen production. He's also the subtask leader for the International Energy Agency's technology collaboration program for renewable hydrogen, and is Australian lead for a direct solar to hydrogen mission called Mission Innovation Sunlight to X. So really well known within the space, and a fantastic researcher who is really focused on developing this technology and seeing it commercialised. Greg has been collaborating with a professor, Professor Gunther Anderson, based at Flinders University for a number of years on Sparc Hydrogen's technology. Gunther's an academic based at Flinders and a senior researcher there, deputy director in their Institute of Nanoscale Science and Technology. And his research areas are really focused around the more detailed interaction of the water with the photocatalyst materials and the sunlight. And so he's been a key collaborator over the journey together with Greg, and remains a part of the research team. And then I mentioned Vinod. Vinod has been with Sparc Hydrogen for over 2 years now. He's a sole employee of Sparc Hydrogen joint venture at this point in time, and he has over 20 years experience working in thermal power. He came across from Sydney to work in our offices here in Adelaide, to lead the Sparc Hydrogen project development and manages everything that goes on in the JV in terms of the day-to-day operations, and also has overall responsibility for the delivery of the pilot plant. In addition, there are 5 researchers based at the University of Adelaide, senior researchers and PhD students who are working dedicated on the Sparc Hydrogen technology, and then there's the contributions from the partners being Sparc Technologies, Fortitude and the university, which are all provided into the joint venture. So a little bit of detail without going too scientific on what photocatalytic water splitting actually is. So this is the process which I mentioned has been known about for about 5 decades, and it really can be considered artificial photosynthesis. So it's using sunlight's energy, which in contact with specifically designed and structured photocatalyst material can split water using that energy alone into hydrogen and oxygen. So very simple in its principle. The 3 ingredients for this process to work are sunlight, water, and importantly, high efficiency and durable photocatalyst materials. And those materials are being developed globally in labs and research institutes around the world, and some startups and spin-outs of those institutes. And we're seeing continued improvements in those materials. These materials are effectively incorporated into Sparc Hydrogen's concentrated solar-based reactors, and our reactors, we feel, accelerate and can accelerate the performance of those materials, and importantly, incorporate them into infrastructure which is inherently modular and scalable from a commercial perspective. So, as I said, the process mimics photosynthesis, and there's no additional energy input required. There's no electricity or fossil-based inputs or sacrificial reagents that are used in the reactor. It is literally those 3 key components that are listed on the slide. So photocatalysis has been known about, as I said, for a number of years, and we don't have any claim over the process, which is photocatalytic water splitting. But what Sparc Hydrogen does have a claim over is technology related to the integration of concentrated sunlight with photocatalytic water splitting. And this goes to our photocatalytic water splitting reactors that we are developing in the field. So the principle behind it is effectively increasing the amount of energy on the photocatalyst material, and what you're seeing in the video here is exactly that. So this is a video taken in the lab showing the photocatalyst material, which is the white material on the bottom, in contact with water and light being put on that photocatalyst material. As the light intensity increases, you see the increasing reaction of that material, which is hydrogen and oxygen bubbling off. So that increase in intensity is really the process we're looking to utilize within our photocatalytic water splitting reactors. And the advantage of using that process are as follows: reduce photocatalyst use. So we're effectively replacing large volumes of photocatalyst material, which under ambient conditions would need to be laid out in panels, with a much smaller reactor, where mirrors are effectively concentrating the sunlight onto that smaller reactor. Less material use, which is a good thing, because these photocatalyst materials are highly engineered materials, and certainly in the early phases of this technology will need to be scaled alongside of our reactors. In addition, it allows us to integrate the technology with already modular and scalable infrastructure from the concentrated solar industry. So these mirror fields that we are deploying, we looked at with our prototyping exercise at the CSIRO, and now deploying ourselves at the Roseworthy pilot plant, are in the field today, and they're typically used to produce either industrial process heat or use of that heat to produce electricity. So the infrastructure that we are using, the core infrastructure, is already commercial and already scaled, and that's a really important thing when we're looking at scaling our reactors. It really helps to de-risk the scale up of our own technology. And thirdly, by concentrating sunlight, we are producing heat. And heat, as with a number of chemical processes, increases efficiencies, which is really important. But it also means we are producing heat that can be used as a byproduct. So concentrated solar fields in use today are used to produce heat in the form of steam often. And we produce that same heat from our fields, which we can sell potentially as a byproduct to the green hydrogen that's coming off of our reactors. So that can really support the scale up and commercialization of the technology. So we have a patent granted, a single patent granted over the technology, which was granted in January of this year. We have 17 other jurisdictions reviewing that same or very similar patent, which we will hear back from those respective officers over the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months. So in terms of the development pathway and where we've come from, as I said, the technology has been developed in Greg Meadford's labs for over a decade, since roughly 2013 in terms of the concept and the development of these reactors which operate under concentrated sunlight. The Sparc Hydrogen joint venture was established at the beginning of 2022, and that was really the corporate, spin out of the technology. And the arrangement between Sparc Hydrogen and the university is such that once the research program for stage 2 has been completed as of the middle of next year, the patents and IP that have been developed by both before Sparc Hydrogen was established and since it's been established will be vended into Sparc Hydrogen itself exclusively. So the JV has exclusive access to the IP that's been developed here. And that will be formalised, as I said, in 2026. Since the JV has been established, there's been a focus on really looking at the commercialisation of the technology and scale up of the technology. So we did a techno-economic analysis, which we are using to guide how we look at developing these plants in a modular and more commercial fashion beyond the pilot. And we've now deployed the technology in the field once at the CSIRO's Energy Centre in Newcastle, late 2023, early 2024, where we utilised an existing solar field and tested our reactor design. And we are utilising information that we got from that testing in the build of our Roseworthy pilot plant, which is a Sparc Hydrogen developed and owned facility based at the University of Adelaide's Roseworthy campus, which is about 50 kilometres north of Adelaide. So that will be a first of its kind facility integrating the type of concentrated solar field that we are looking to scale in a commercial fashion. Sparc Technologies business model, which applies not only to Sparc, our view on Sparc Hydrogen, but also in EcoSparc, is to develop IP, which is unique and novel, and use that IP to look at commercialisation through either licensing or manufacture of reactors to maximise the value of that IP such that it can be utilised in a global fashion. So just switching on to the Roseworthy pilot plant, there's been a lot of activity at site recently. The process that's been undertaken there is looking to deploy off-the-shelf linear Fresnel concentrated solar infrastructure, which was manufactured overseas in Europe. That has now been shipped to site, and as you see in the photos, that has now been erected on site. So we completed the civil works in sort of late April, early May. The linear Fresnel modules were delivered to site soon after, and those modules were erected last week successfully. So you can see on screen there, and there's a photo on the subsequent slide as to what they look like. These modules are effectively single modules of a mirror field, which are concentrating sunlight onto that central receiver, which is raised above the mirrors. To make a bigger facility literally means bolting more modules onto the end to end on those linear Fresnel systems. And the amount of sunlight you're able to capture within that field really drives the amount of hydrogen that you produce. So in terms of the pilot itself, we are looking to have mechanical completion occur there in late June and commissioning to follow in Q3. In terms of the objectives of the pilot plant, there's probably 5 key objectives, which summarises what we've put in our recent ASX announcements. Firstly, is to advance the technology readiness from a prototyping scale to a scale which is incorporated within the commercial concentrated solar infrastructure, which we can scale from there. So that takes our technology readiness from TerraWell 5 to TerraWell 6 or 7. and that is obviously operating in a real world on-sun environment. So we are looking to obviously learn a lot from how this facility performs in real world conditions over a period of 12 months or a full solar year. Secondly, it is looking to de-risk what follows, which would be a larger commercial scale field. By performing or by deploying the facility at Roseworthy, we are looking at the infrastructure that bolts together into a larger field. So it really is de-risking the commercial scale up of the facility. Notwithstanding, when you go to a bigger field, there's going to be additional factors that need to be considered, particularly with the balance of plant that supports the concentrated solar infrastructure. Thirdly, this will be a truly globally leading facility for the research and development and commercialisation of photocatalytic water splitting. That is really important in terms of visibility within the photocatalysis and green hydrogen industry, and also with the photocatalyst collaborators that we are working with and that we're looking to work with in future. So we think this facility will be a real calling card for the industry to test materials in an on-sun environment. And that's really important because we want access to the best photocatalyst materials, as you'd expect, to commercialise the technology going forward. It will solidify our leading position in the development of concentrated solar-based reactors. Certainly, we don't see in both the corporate space or the research space anyone anywhere near as advanced in developing reactors in the field, certainly based on concentrated solar technology. And it will importantly showcase the technology with our own investors, but also to other stakeholders, government, other interested parties, strategic parties who are interested in this technology, etc., which is a big step forward from where we've been in the lab and prototyping phase. So this is a slide that I presented before, but it really goes to the simplicity of the technology, as you see or seen on the screen or the prior slides. It really is simple technology, being a mirror field, which we are looking to link together with our photocatalytic water splitting reactors, which are suspended above those mirrors. I should say that we are designing and manufacturing those reactors effectively in-house. We're contracting the manufacture, but certainly the design and engineering is all be within Sparc Hydrogen, and that gets slotted into those solar fields. So there's an integration piece there, which will be certainly looking to de-risk at the pilot phase, and that integration piece is happening over the next month to 6 weeks at the pilot. Once we get that integration piece, we will be producing hydrogen, both hydrogen and oxygen, without any electricity input into the reactor. So really exciting, and there's a lot to be said for what's been achieved already and what's to come over the next few weeks up at Roseworthy. Compare that to electrolysis, where you have either a solar PV field and or wind and batteries. You need high voltage electrical infrastructure to support those facilities and also support the electrolyzers which go with them to produce hydrogen and oxygen. So there's a lot more infrastructure involved there, which brings with it both cost, permitting considerations, and quite a significant integration piece with variable solar and wind with electrolyzers that like to operate as consistently as possible. So simplicity is the key, and if we can get this technology nailed in its most simple form, I believe it will drive a very low cost hydrogen production when utilised in the right use cases and areas, of course. So we're looking at much larger fields ultimately with the technology. This is a commercial scale linear Fresnel field based in Spain. This just goes to show that you can scale this mirror infrastructure. As I said, it's deployed in the field today for production of heat and electricity. So I'm confident that there is the ability to make much larger fields, and importantly, they're modular and scalable such that the size of the field really is dependent on the number of modules you link together and the number of rows you put side by side. This is a new slide, and appreciate it is relatively wordy, so I won't go through all of the points. But what is important to say here is that we are producing green hydrogen, and that is certainly our focus. But ultimately, our reactors are also heating water. And that is what a lot of the concentrated solar facilities, certainly the Leonard Fresnel facilities deployed commercially are doing. And that hot water or steam is required for industrial process heat, and particularly lower temperature industrial process heat, which is used in a number of different industries. The food and beverage industry uses a lot. For example, a key stage of the alumina processing uses digestion, which requires a lot of this steam. And there are a number of other use cases for steam in industry around Australia and globally. In fact, if you look at the whole process heat market in Australia, which incorporates both low temperature and high temperature heat, which is sort of 250 degrees, particularly 600 degrees and above, that is about a $10 billion per annum market in terms of the energy requirements there. The energy requirements today are typically produced through burning natural gas and or coal. So there's a real decarbonisation issue there for industry, and the concentrated solar industry is looking to provide a green alternative there. So by having an alternative product alongside our green hydrogen and oxygen that's being produced from the reactor, it gives us multiple angles into the market and also multiple revenue streams potentially as we look to scale the technology, which can be a key competitive advantage beyond what an electrolysis plant would have, for example. So the use cases for our technology, we believe, are broad, and that's because it was driven by the fact that the power requirements are low. The electricity required in our plant is really for balance of plant. We don't use electricity to split water or within our reactor itself. So that opens up areas, like remote areas, off-grid areas, mine sites, etc., where electricity is not abundant. Also, sort of remote fueling stations, for example, if that industry, hydrogen sort of trucking industry, were to really take off, agriculture as well. It also is a very scalable technology, as I've described, which is unlike electrolysis, which is really you make the investment and then you're set. And that's because the investment really goes into the CapEx, being the electricity infrastructure, the solar and wind, and it's difficult to scale from there. We also produce a commingled hydrogen and oxygen product within our reactors. I should say, and should have said on the previous slide, that combustion of hydrogen is a key potential use case in the green economy. And combustion produces high temperatures. High temperatures are required for process heat within steel making, within cement making, etc. So there's really a synergy there where if you consider an alumina plant, for example, which requires very high temperature heat, which you could use through the combustion or produce through the combustion of the hydrogen produced from our reactor, along with the steam for the digestion process. So you could have a dual use case there. Certainly within that one particular example being the alumina industry, but there are other examples where that could be the case as well. And that goes to the last point, which is our industrial heat co-product, being the hot water or steam that's produced out of our reactors. Where we're going and what we're looking to achieve, obviously, is the commercialisation of a low-cost green hydrogen production technology. Electrolysis is having its issues, and those issues are sort of being borne out in the market and with project developments and project developers pausing or cancelling projects entirely. There is certainly a window for next generation technology to come through within the green hydrogen industry. And I think Sparc Hydrogen is really well placed with where we're at, making effectively a bit of a counter-cyclical investment at the time where we're developing the tech. And one thing I am certain of is that the requirement for green hydrogen is not going anywhere. It is a massive industry. It's a heavily polluting industry, being the hydrogen industry, which is about 100 million tonnes used per year. So if we can crack the nut being a low-cost, scalable, modular reactor producing green hydrogen, I'm confident that there is an end market for the products that we produce, and that's what we're looking to do. And then just to summarise the advantages of photocatalysis, this is a slide that I've produced in our decks previous. We've added industrial heat there as an advantage of photocatalysis and the byproduct revenue potential that provides. And just to say again, that is a significant market in of itself, the market for process heat and steam. But photocatalysis uses very little electricity, no electricity in the reactor to split water into hydrogen and oxygen. The simplicity of photocatalysis drives the potential for very low cost. Sunlight is the only energy input into the reactor. It's using modular and scalable infrastructure, which goes to the core of Sparc Hydrogen's IP. There's an industrial heat byproduct potential and it's emissions free. So that wraps up the presentation on Sparc Hydrogen and the technology and the piloting that we are undertaking there. In terms of what Sparc Technologies more broadly has achieved in the first half or first few months of 2025, I think it's been relatively significant, including moving to stage 2, which has really kicked off the piloting up at Roseworthy and kicked off the investment that both Sparc Technologies and Fortescue have made, additional investment within the JV. We've also been making a lot of progress on our EcoSpark enhanced coatings with field trials with very high profile collaborators, including BHP, Mitsubishi Alliance, Santos, the Government of South Australia, among others. And we're looking to use the results from those field trials into the commercialisation of the additive within FY26. Coming up, we have a number of grant funding opportunities on foot within Sparc Hydrogen. They would allow us to do more and also extend the funding that we've already contributed. They wouldn't require additional funding to go in from the partners. So it's really about building on what we've invested and maximising that or leveraging that to the maximum extent possible. And obviously the completion of the pilot plant around mid-year and the commissioning thereafter, I think will be a significant milestone, taking the technology forward and de-risking it for that next more commercial phase beyond the piloting. So I will wrap up the presentation there and happy to take any questions from the webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Great overview. Yeah, as Nick said, please, if you've got any more questions, just type them into the chat now. We've actually had quite a few that have come in over the last couple of days, so I'm going to start with those. Nick, can you explain how Sparc expects to generate a commercial return for shareholders from its PWS hydrogen tech? Specifically, what's the commercialization strategy? Does it involve manufacturing reactors, licensing the tech, pursuing a royalty model, or a mix of these approaches?
So look, it's a really good question, and the JV has full flexibility around the model it wants to take forward, assuming that the technology continues to develop and is looking prospective in the market. So the key thing for me around the development of technology is that it is unique. It has a leading position in the field. And I'm confident that Sparc Hydrogen has that position within photocatalysis, and particularly photocatalytic water splitting reactors. So we are global leaders in that space, and we are looking to push forward the development and commercialization of photocatalysis such that it can be deployed to meet the growing need for green hydrogen. The ability to monetize the technology, again, all of those options are on the table, and it'll be up to the JV to decide what is the best model to utilize as we approach commercialization. Certainly, Sparc Hydrogen as it's set up is a technology developer, it is not a project developer. So look, I wouldn't expect that Sparc Hydrogen will be looking to build and produce molecules itself beyond the de-risking of the technology, as you have to do to encourage others to utilize it. So in that sense, it's a capital light approach within Sparc Hydrogen. The pilot plant is costing a couple $2 million, which has been fully funded. There will most likely be a commercial scale up from there that I would assume that the JV needs to lead. And then, it's really opening the doors to the market, showing that the technology can work, the advantages that it has, which provide you the ability to license that tech to others, to other project developers. That might include someone like a Fortescue, but it can include people like Shell or other hydrogen-focused developers, project developers out there as well, where you effectively license the technology, you take a royalty on the back of that, and you don't contribute capital towards the project itself. So hopefully that's kind of provided a bit of a perspective around the options there. As I said, I think Sparc Hydrogen is a technology developer rather than a project developer. So it's really a capital light approach where we look to de-risk the tech, create value in the technology itself, and then you receive the rewards from the value you create through licensing, royalties, etc.
All right, thanks, Nick. Given Fortescue is already an equal partner in the JV, how should shareholders think about Spark's role in capturing long-term value from the tech beyond just being part of a research initiative? I know you've probably just touched on that, but
Yeah, look, certainly Sparc Hydrogen is not looking to do research for research's sake. Both Sparc Technologies and Fortescue in particular are commercialisation entities. Fortescue are looking to commercialise technology across the board within both the green hydrogen space, but broadly the green energy space. And we're not interested in sort of, as I said, research for research sake. So it's a commercial entity, make no bones about that. And that's why the additional investment was made in January of this year to move to stage 2. It's because of the commercial potential of the technology. I guess that goes to the partnership that we have. Look, we have a shareholders agreement, which is pretty standard for a private company, being the Sparc Hydrogen joint venture. It provides equal protections to the shareholders, and how the shareholdings develop beyond stage 2 is really not been decided yet, because we're not at that point in time right now. But what I can say is the partnership remains very committed to the JV. I think it's evidenced by the fact that we are pushing forward, building a pilot when a lot of the money is probably going out of the space. I think that shows the potential of the tech, the validation that it provides, having really high quality partners like Fortescue, like the University of Adelaide involved alongside Sparc Technologies. So yeah, that's how I would characterise it. As I said, it's an equal partnership. Everyone contributes, and there's a lot of commitment that's been provided by all partners to the JV. Notwithstanding, some of the media that people might read out there.
yeah, that actually leads perfectly into the next question, Nick. There's been media coverage suggesting Fortescue may be scaling back its green hydrogen ambitions. Given Fortescue is an equal shareholder in the JV, can you clarify how closely Sparc is currently aligned with Fortescue and whether their level of involvement or interest has changed?
Yeah, look, and as I said before, I'm not going to be a spokesperson for Fortescue, so I won't speak on their behalf. But what I will say is that the decision to move to stage 2 and commit the additional $2.5 million from Fortescue and Sparc was not made lightly. The project was put under a review before making that additional investment decision. There was no commitment or requirement for either partner to put more money in. So to me, that is recent and real validation of what Sparc Hydrogen has been doing, and commitment from both Fortescue and Sparc in terms of dollars, real dollars going into the project. What I would say as an observer of, Fortescue and the strategy there on the hydrogen and green energy side is that the focus seems to be narrowing in on really on an energy approach or approach to green energy and hydrogen, which is really relevant to the Fortescue business, which includes mining iron ore from the Pilbara and then one day processing that iron ore using green processes into ultimately green steel or green steel-like products. That is a massive opportunity, not only for hydrogen and for green hydrogen. So I think there remains a deep commitment there to hydrogen, and I think some of the media and reports and some of the reductions that have been made within that energy division really go to project development rather than R&D. I think that's been made fairly clear that commitment to R&D has probably only increased because Fortescue, like others, are seeing that R&D and new ways of doing this are the way, in terms of producing green hydrogen and green molecules, are going to carry the day to really move the ball forward from where the electrolysis space finds itself at the moment.
Well, thanks, Nick. Next one, has there been interest from any other parties, either in Australia or internationally, in the Sparc Hydrogen tech? And is Sparc receiving or expecting to receive any support from the government as the project progresses?
You look, so there has been quite a lot of interest inbound across the board, including from researchers, people involved in the green hydrogen space who are really committed to the green hydrogen space, of which there remains a lot globally, despite the media coverage again. And that also includes strategic partners or parties, sorry, looking at ways to produce green hydrogen either for their own business or for a business opportunity where they're looking to sell those molecules elsewhere. So I think Sparc Technologies and Sparc Hydrogen receive quite a lot of inbound on what we're doing. I think we received that inbound because we are, I think, global leaders in the space, being photocatalytic water splitting, and people who are involved in the space really can see the benefits of the approach. So a lot of people with a lot of eyeballs, I would say, are watching what we're doing, both in the prototyping now at Roseworthy, and I think there's a lot of keen interest in how it develops. So there has been a lot of interest across the board.
Well, thanks, Nick. Now I'll just go to the ones that have come through recently.
And so to touch on government, Simon, I missed that part of the question. Government support, we have had government funding in terms of grant funding from the AEA program, which was probably 18 months ago, supported the prototyping. We got about a bit under $500,000 from that, the first round of that program. We do have an application in for the larger AEA funding round, which has not been announced yet. So hopefully we do get some more funding there from the federal government, but you never know with these programs. So we are actively seeking grant funding because that allows us to do more within the JV to support the investment commitment that's been made at the risk of the partners.
Thanks, Nick. There's a couple of double ups here, so I'll just try to, and some of them can be a little bit technical, but in the video, we see the gas bubbles rising through the fluid. But how are the oxygen and hydrogen separated before they recombine into water? I don't know. I think it just means how are they separated?
No, that's a very, very good question. And there's probably a highly technical answer, which goes to the interaction of the bubbles and the action on the photocatalyst surface, which is a real focus for researchers in the field. So the idea is that you split water and it doesn't recombine on the surface of the photocatalyst. So that has been a challenge which has been progressively overcome with more research and dollars going into the space. So the bubbles that you are seeing coming off there are in it's called a stoichiometric ratio. So they're in the ratio that you find hydrogen and oxygen in water. Once the bubbles are migrating through the water, they are not then recombining. So you have a commingled gas mix of hydrogen, oxygen, and a little bit of probably water vapor that needs to be separated as a separate process beyond the reactor. So that's a process that there is commercial technology. There are commercial separators which use different processes like membranes, etc., that you can use. There is improvements in that technology ongoing because it's not only a question for our tech, but a number of other sort of new green energy related tech requires hydrogen, oxygen, and other similar gas separation. There's also the potential to use the commingled, i.e. the hydrogen and oxygen gas mix together. And that goes to that combustion piece that I mentioned earlier. So combustion of hydrogen is mixing hydrogen with oxygen and using that to produce heat. So if you use that technology, if you use that process, you're not actually having to separate the hydrogen and oxygen. So yes, we can separate hydrogen and oxygen into its constituent parts and produce a pure hydrogen stream and a pure oxygen stream, but also you can use the commingled gas mix together potentially for combustion use cases.
Okay, next question. What is the current and predicted solar to hydrogen efficiency of PWS?
Again, really good question. And this has been, I guess the key challenge for the field, being the photocatalysis field, is getting the solar hydrogen efficiencies to a level such that for a certain cost of infrastructure, and as I said, we're confident in our infrastructure that it can be low cost and scalable. For a certain infrastructure investment, you can get a return in terms of the production based on the amount of sunlight they're capturing. So solar hydrogen efficiencies are increasing all the time in terms of the photocatalyst materials that are being developed and also the reactors that are being developed, like ourselves. So I think, for us, we are targeting a level of solid hydrogen efficiency in the interim stages, which is, in the single digits. So, calling around the 5% level, which we believe is a level where you can, certainly support scaling of the technology. In the longer term, and what we've seen from the research and academia is that 10% is achievable in the not too distant future as well. And at 10%, that opens up increasing number of use cases and really drives very low cost hydrogen production, particularly if you are selling a byproduct, being that steam. The theoretical limits of efficiency of photocatalytic water splitting are approaching 30%. So it's not dissimilar to solar PV. The theoretical limits of solar PV, i.e. the conversion of solar energy into electricity, is about 30%. That industry is now in the low 20s, call it, for your solar panels that you're seeing on your roof. And that started from a very low level, single digits, and then more investment money, more funding, more research, and got up to 20% relatively quickly in the scheme of things for technology. So we're hoping and we're feeling that a similar thing can happen in photocatalysis, taking it from single digits up through, well into more towards the theoretical limits to drive ultra low cost hydrogen production. But as I said, at 5%, we think we can do something commercially, and at 10%, I think it's very broad number of use cases will come into play.
All right, thanks, Nick. The next one is, what is the minimum scale that is likely to be commercially viable?
Again, good question, and something that we obviously think about for looking beyond Roseworthy. I think one way to look at it is to look at where these linear Fresnel solar fields are being deployed. One example I could provide is a linear Fresnel field in Spain, which has been developed quite recently for Heineken. It's alongside their brewery in Seville. That solar field is about 6,000 meters squared in terms of the mirror area. To give you an idea, our pilot plant is about 130 meters squared in terms of the mirror field. So our feeling is that if we're looking at the small commercial scale, it's probably anywhere from a 50 to 150 times scale up from the pilot plant would be small commercial scale, and that would be producing fairly small quantities of hydrogen and oxygen, which would have a use and could be sold, but also be producing quantities of steam that could be sold as Heineken are using for their brewery.
All right, now, Nick, I'm just conscious of time and there's a lot here, so I might just pick a couple more and then we might answer them via email. Are you happy to do that?
Sure, yep.
Where does the water come from? Does it have to be pure H2O, or can it be salt water? Can it be brine? And how much, I don't know, how much water in practice do you need to make a ton of hydrogen? A ton.
Yep, good questions. Water purity, same as electrolysis for all intents and purposes, which is kind of high quality, sort of demineralized water, or deionized water, sort of the classification. Is there potential to use salty water, brines, etc.? Theoretically, some people in photocatalysis would say yes. My personal view is a bit more skeptical. At the end of the day, these photocatalysts are highly engineered materials, in some cases highly structured. Would you want impurities kind of settling out of water, depositing on them, blocking sunlight? I don't think so. So my starting point, and certainly I think the view here is that it is high quality water, of which, look, if you're in the middle of the desert, in the middle of the outback, water is not abundant. But what you can do is look at the number of project developments for electrolysis plants around the world, and water of the similar quantity. We probably use slightly less than electrolysis, but same quality certainly for those plants to purify the water, for a facility like a Roseworthy, an RO plant, reverse osmosis plant is perfectly fine. Very well known, well used technology globally in the water purification space. 1 ton of hydrogen requires about 10 tons of water. It's 10 to 1, effectively is the ratio. And that's based on chemistry. So that is exactly the same as for electrolysis. That is the ratio for splitting water into hydrogen and oxygen.
Okay, the next question. How does PWS reactor compare to solar electricity and electrolysis in terms of area required to capture solar energy per kilogram of hydrogen production?
Again, good question. There's a few variables there. The variable on where you put it is less if you're comparing solar PV with us, because we both use solar energy. So ultimately, ours is a solar-driven technology. Would you use it in northern Alaska? Probably not. Would you use it throughout Australia? Well, yes. So you're really looking at good solar resource. It's the same for solar PV. The real answer to that question goes to the solar hydrogen efficiency. And, I'm not going to provide with an exact number there because there are other variables that input. But certainly in the solar hydrogen efficiencies that I mentioned earlier, 5 to 10%, the break-even point on area is in that type of range. So if you're approaching 10%, you would expect the solar field to be a bit smaller. If you're anything above 10, it gets smaller and smaller for a given amount, or given comparable amount of hydrogen production, if that makes sense.
Yep. Thanks, Nick. We'll just do one more. You mentioned low capex and infrastructure requirements for PWS. What is a ballpark estimated cost for PWS installation for a megawatt plant compared to electrolysis?
Again, that's a very difficult question to provide a high-level answer to. It goes to the solar hydrogen efficiency. It goes to where you put it, being the solar energy resource, so the available energy you have to convert into hydrogen and oxygen, which will also partly drive how much it costs to deploy the infrastructure. So I think the comparison from a perspective that the question is aiming at there, which is the costs, really go to the levelized cost of hydrogen. So that is a widely used benchmark figure across the field, which amortizes the cost of the infrastructure, the operating costs per unit of hydrogen that you produce. So that's really the figure that you want to be focusing on, rather than trying to compare individual facilities. The belief in the market is the levelized cost of hydrogen, for electrolysis in terms of the current generation of plants, is sort of towards double digits per kilogram in Australia. There are some projects being developed on that basis. There are some use cases which can support that basis. The target for our technology, but also for electrolysis, is to get it, well below that 5 and below. At $5 per kilo and below, there are plenty of use cases to go around for green hydrogen, both using electrolysis and photocatalysis, such that I wouldn't have an issue that the market would be there.
All right, that wraps up today's webinar. We're looking forward, Nick, to tracking Sparc Hydrogen's progress as the pilot plant moves towards commissioning and green hydrogen production. If you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Thanks again for joining us, and thank you, Nick, for the update.
Thanks, Simon, and thanks everyone for joining.